Hi guys, how are you doing? It's Megan here. I hope that you're ready for another chapter learning about some of the context for the book of Acts. Today we are in part 2 of learning about the political world of the first century church. This may seem a lot like a history class, and that's because in some ways it is, but I think it's really interesting and I know it's really important to know. So, I hope that you stick with me as we learn about some of the Roman government, and the Jewish government. You may be asking, Megan, why is this important? All I want to do is read the book of Acts. And I understand, but also understanding who ruled is really important. Why were the Jews so dissatisfied? Why didn't they like the Roman government? And maybe who ruled in the Roman government? I know it wasn't just the Roman Empire and the Roman emperor. So if the Roman emperor wasn't ruling in Judea, in the biblical, where the Jewish temple was, then who was ruling? You might ask. Well, we are going to answer some of those questions today. Also, Paul and Peter interact with many political systems in the book of Acts, but if we don't know who they are, then we don't know the importance of them. So today we are going to learn about some of these things so that when the book of Acts references a ruler of some kind, we actually know what they're talking about. So let's dig in. We are in chapter 6 today. I invite you, if you have your books, to turn to page 56 in your books. It's titled The Political World of the First Century Church, Part 2. Who is God? God is the ruler of all nations. And our lesson theme for today is that God is always the one who is ultimately in charge of the whole world. The Old Testament and the New Testament revealed. What Old Testament passage speaks to what we're talking about today is from Psalm 29, verses 10 through 11. And it says, "The Lord sits enthroned over the flood. The Lord is enthroned as king forever. The Lord gives strength to his people, and the Lord blesses his people with peace." So even when Rome ruled the known world with its huge power, the Lord sat enthroned in heaven and blessed his people with peace, even in the midst of this. For example, when Paul and Silas were in prison in the Philippian jail, they had the peace of God. They sang songs and prayed in the worst of situations. Similarly, in Psalm 3, David wrote about the many foes who had risen against him. Yet despite these enemies, he was able to lie down and sleep knowing that the Lord would take care of him. So let's dig into our story time today. The political world of the first century church, part 2. As hard as we might try, understanding history is not always simple. And the political world of the first century is one of the most complicated and sometimes confusing periods of history. It's hard to keep track of who ruled where and who's in charge of what, so let's take a look and see what we can figure out. The emperor was the highest ruler of the Roman Empire, and any government official who went against his will was removed from office, or even worse, was executed. Ruling under the emperor were Roman procurators and proconsuls, also called governors, and native kings appointed by the Roman emperor. To complicate matters, the Jewish Sanhedrin had religious authority over the Jewish people, making sure that all the ceremonial laws were being kept as written down in the law of Moses. In addition, the Jewish Sanhedrin acted as a court to settle legal arguments brought by Jews who had disagreements with each other. The Jewish Sanhedrin didn't have authority to make judgments in criminal matters, however, such as robbery, murder, and treason. Oh, I forgot to mention. 2 other ever-present authorities. If you were a Jewish person living in Palestine, you couldn't forget the Roman auxiliary soldiers stationed throughout the country, and the temple guards who worked under the high priest and who watched with keen eyes, making sure that nothing troublesome happened within the walls of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. The Roman governors, Roman provinces and rulers. Within the Roman Empire were two kinds of provinces: senatorial provinces and imperial provinces. In senatorial provinces, the Roman Senate appointed a man with a rank equal to a senator to govern as proconsul for a 1-year term. Many cities mentioned in Acts were located in senatorial provinces. Because these areas were usually loyal to Rome, there were no Roman troops stationed in them. The senatorial provinces included Sicily, Pamphylia, Cyprus, Macedonia, Crete, Achaia, Bithynia, and Asia. Regions that had recently been conquered by Rome were imperial provinces. They were ruled by legates or procurators appointed by the emperor depending on the size of the province. Imperial provinces were those that might easily cause trouble and might resist Roman rule. Roman soldiers were permanently stationed in these provinces. Imperial provinces included Syria, Cilicia, Gaul, Galatia, and Britain. So just to review, that was a lot of words. So senatorial provinces were provinces that were loyal to Rome, and they were ruled by proconsuls that were elected year to year, and there were no soldiers stationed in them because they were loyal to Rome, and so Rome trusted them. However, imperial provinces were ruled by procurators, and they did have soldiers stationed in them because they were different areas that had recently been conquered by Rome, and Rome did not trust them at all. So soldiers were stationed in these areas so that they didn't rebel and rise up against Rome. When we're talking about Judea and Jerusalem area, this was a province that we know was an imperial province. It was recently conquered by Rome, and there were soldiers stationed around them because Rome didn't trust them. So I'm going to move on real quick. When the Romans conquered a small kingdom, the emperor often allowed a local king to rule. Herod the Great, who ruled at the time of Jesus' birth, was a native king. If there were any troubles in these kingdoms, the king was promptly replaced by a procurator. During most of Paul's ministry, Judea was not ruled by a king, but by a procurator. During the reigns of Claudius and Nero, the time of Acts 13 through 28, 7 procurators ruled Judea. Judea's capital was the coastal city of Caesarea Maritima, built by King Herod the Great. The procurators had 5 cohorts, around 600 to 1,000 men, of auxiliary soldiers under the command. And an auxiliary soldier was made of local Gentiles, not Roman citizens. When there was a serious disturbance, the procurator asked the Roman legate and his Roman legions located in nearby Syria for help. 4 of the Judean cohorts were housed at Caesarea Maritima, and 1 cohort was in Jerusalem at the Antonia fortress. Procurators tended to be cruel and corrupt. The Jews longed for the day when they no longer were under Roman rule. From time to time, Jewish zealots would react against the strict control of the Roman governors, using acts of terrorism, kidnapping, and assassination. But these freedom attempts led to more trouble between the Jews and Roman rulers. Roman garrison in Jerusalem. Looming over the northern end of the temple in Jerusalem, its dark shadow, a constant reminder of Rome's power, was the Antonia fortress. This huge stone structure was the home of 1 Roman auxiliary cohort and its commander. If there was the slightest inkling of trouble in the city, armed soldiers were on the spot to crush it. During the Jewish feast days, when the population of Jerusalem quadrupled in size, The Roman procurator, who usually lived in Caesarea Maritima, would go to Jerusalem with additional forces. The awareness of his menacing presence helped keep the city under control. So let's look at the Jewish authorities now. Kings of Palestine. During the days of the early church, only 2 kings, both descendants of King Herod the Great, ruled in Judea. Procurators ruled Judea during most of this time period. King Agrippa I ruled from AD 41 through 44. By AD 41, all 3 sons of King Herod the Great, which are Herod Antipas, Herod Archelaus, and Herod Philip, were dead or deposed. Emperor Claudius appointed King Herod Agrippa I, who was the grandson of Herod the Great, as king over Judea. The Jews were happier with a king, even if he wasn't totally Jewish, than with another procurator. Little by little, the Romans gave Agrippa I more area to govern until eventually the size of his kingdom equaled that of his grandfather. King Agrippa was the king who... Hold on, let me start that over. Little by little, the Romans gave Agrippa I more area to govern until eventually the size of his kingdom equaled that of his grandfather. King Agrippa I was the king who killed James, the brother of John, and imprisoned Peter for preaching about Jesus. Agrippa I was loyal to the Roman government, but the people, even the non-Jewish people, didn't like him. No one mourned his death. After he died, the emperor once again appointed a procurator to rule Judea, since Agrippa II was still too young to rule. King Agrippa II eventually ruled in northern Palestine, but he never governed Judea, Samaria, or western Galilee. At one point, the Apostle Paul talked about his Christian faith with Agrippa II and his sister Bernice, which is in the book of Acts. Although the king never accepted Paul's faith, he did acknowledge that Paul was innocent of all the charges that the Jews in Jerusalem had brought against Paul. The accusations had to do with questions about Jewish laws they said he had broken. He said to Festus, the procurator, this man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar. So this is a fantastic example of why learning about this stuff is so important. So we know in the book of Acts that Paul talked to King Agrippa II, who was an elected king from the Roman government, because the Jewish Sanhedrin had brought some charges against him. But because the Roman government and specifically King Agrippa II was in favor with the Roman Empire, Paul got off the hook because King Agrippa appealed to the procurator who was in charge of Judea and in charge of the Jewish area, and managed to get him free. So these are the things that are kind of hovering above the book of Acts, and you may be wondering when you're reading, why did Paul get off the hook? And it's because of some of these political factors. He talked to a king appointed by Rome, and Rome ruled Judea, and so he got off the hook, even if the Jewish Sanhedrins didn't like it. But they ended up being kind of overruled, I guess you could say. So let's talk a little bit about the Jewish Sanhedrin. This group of 71 Pharisees and Sadducees ruled from the temple in Jerusalem and had great civil and religious authority over the Jewish people. In one sense, the Sanhedrin had authority over every Jew throughout the whole world. Its orders were to be obeyed. In Acts 18:12 through 17, we read about the Jews of Corinth taking a formal request against Paul to Gallio, the proconsul of Achaia. Gallio, realizing the complaint concerned Jewish law, told the angry Jews to have the Jewish authorities settle the matter. When local Jewish courts disagreed with each other, the Sanhedrin would settle the dispute. Practically speaking, however, because of the distance, the Sanhedrin's direct civil authority had power only in Judea. While Jesus was alive, he was relatively safe from the Sanhedrin's threats, as long as he was in Galilee, because Galilee was under the rule of King Herod Antipas. The Sanhedrin was made up of wealthy Sadducees and Pharisees, and the high priest was its leader. A member of the Sanhedrin held office for many years and often for his entire life. The Pharisees and Sadducees disagreed on many things, but most of them agreed on one thing: the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth. The temple guards. The temple guard, composed of priests and Levites who served at the temple, was under the authority of the high priest and the Sanhedrin. The captain of the temple guard was a high-ranking priest and was second in authority to the high priest. The Roman government allowed the temple guard to be armed with swords and staves. The temple guard kept order in the temple and arrested anyone, Jew or Gentile, who caused a disturbance. In Jerusalem and throughout Judea, upon the authority of the Sanhedrin, the temple guard could form a posse and arrest any Jewish person who committed a religious, civil, or criminal offense. The temple guard also had a jail where prisoners could be held for trial or be put in debtor's prison. Answering the question, who's in charge here, was not always easy in the first century world. Between the supreme ruler of the empire, the emperor himself, his many governors with different titles depending upon which province they ruled, local kings, and the Jewish authorities, the people had many people to whom they answered. One thing that Jewish people and Christians believers knew for certain was that God, the creator and ruler of all the nations, was ultimately in charge of everything that happened. This truth gave courage and comfort to the early church when they were persecuted for their faith and when they journeyed from city to city, taking the gospel to the people all around them. So, some of these things are a little bit complex, but they're important. There were times where the Jewish authorities didn't like the Christians. In fact, there were, most of the time, the Sanhedrin and the Jewish authorities didn't like Christians. Sometimes, for Paul, for example, being a citizen of the Roman government benefited him. But other times, the Roman government wasn't really they weren't very supportive of the Christian church either. But the Christians knew that God was ultimately in control, even though they were constantly being pulled between the Jewish authorities and the Roman authorities that they were technically under. So knowing some of this stuff can be really helpful when we're reading the book of Acts, because these are some of the dynamics that are constantly influencing the lives of the people we read in the book. So I hope that you were able to learn something. I know that it's always a wonderful reminder for me to learn some of these things. And I hope that you have a great week, you guys. I enjoy being with you. I hope that school is going well. And have a great week.